Good day, everyone. Let me get the link shared out for the live stream. Hope you're all doing well. I think we have an important week ahead of us. On the charts. All right. The link shared out. I think my screen is sharing. Well, a major flush on the Bitcoin chart over the weekend. Massive volume, massive liquidations. I got out of my longs before the majority of the dump, around $67,000. And I do not have a long from the bottom. I wasn't trading this weekend. I was letting the charts play out. But I do think it's somewhat probable that the low is in. Now, does that mean that I'm just going to long here and look for all-time highs? Not necessarily. But I am going to be looking for key structures to form, and not just looking to take one long towards all-time highs, but I'll be looking to take high probability, high risk reward setups with invalidation to continue adding to my long over the coming week and weeks. So I want to go over the charts and share some of those thoughts. Now, the most important thing to start off with is there's no certainty that price is going to all-time highs. I do think it's the most likely scenario. And I think it's the most likely scenario that the major low is in. That does not mean that risk management isn't absolutely necessary. And it does not mean that trade setup shouldn't have invalidation, in my view. Someone's saying that my screen isn't sharing. Let me just make sure that everything is working here. Actually, why can't I see the full chat here? Let me move. Oh, my screen isn't moving, they're saying. Okay. But I think there's going to be some great opportunities. I think some of the structures here are quite clear. And so let me give my high time frame perspective as we come into the week ahead. I think it's very likely that our wave 4 is done. We had something to the tune of 270 million volume in the last 5-minute candle at the lows here. And if that is the case, well, I'll be looking for, in the week ahead, a big 1-2 to form. What would that maybe look like? I'm going to give a few different scenarios here. Well, that might look something like this. Come up and take these local highs. On the daily chart, we can see a daily candle high here. We have a few structural levels of resistance. What I would prefer to see here is a push up through these highs and some ranging over the week into Wednesday, Thursday. Come and take all our local lows and retest this horizontal structure. Let's go to the daily chart really quick. Just a nice retest of this level, sweeping local lows. This is getting a little messy here on the daily chart. And expecting a very strong move off of something like that. And this would be the 1-2 into our wave 5. Higher time frame wave 5, which I think there is a reasonable case to be made. Sends us towards 100K. So that's the bullish scenario. Are there bear scenarios? Absolutely. We start breaking down, right? We don't put in a higher low. This is going to be the primary high time frame invalidation for some of this idea is going to be losing this low. But for me, that doesn't mean that all of my stop losses are going to be under this low. I'm going to start looking at some local structure to add to longs and invalidate some of those local setups. So over the weekend, I wasn't trading. I did identify some key ideas, and I basically had 3 scenarios. All of them led towards price coming lower. I'm going to just go over those really quickly. So this was on the 13th, on Saturday. So I shared a few scenarios that I'd be looking at for the week ahead. So one of the things I identified was this idea of a descending channel. And my thought was, well, maybe we push up, we retest the channel, establish it as a third lower high, and then looking for price to move down into this 58K, 60K region, tapping this channel for a nice long setup. That was one thought I had Saturday, but again, just planning for the week ahead. The other scenario was just another move down, but just a local low into the 63K region, bouncing off this. We just ripped through that pretty quickly when we eventually broke down. And then the most bearish scenario, which would be, yes, we bounce off of these range lows. We have that nice bounce, but we put in a lower high. We have really bearish signs, and this would take a while to play out, right? So all the scenarios was looking for lower locally, kind of 2 scenarios where we test the range lows, which we have, but looking for being open to the idea of a lower high and a more bearish move down to 50K. I do not think that's very likely, and probably not going to be trading towards that. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't be interested in some local short setups, but I'd be taking profits off them aggressively. But I do want to point out this channel idea. This is the yellow channel here, which we actually did bounce off, but the difference between this chart and that chart is we just came straight down over the weekend, right into the channel, and we didn't put in the lower high first and then come down into the channel during the week, which is kind of what I was looking at. So those were the structures I was looking at. Identifying the key horizontal, ascending, descending structures to look to trade around. So here we are on Monday. I'm back at the charts. I do have a small breakout long here. So I took a small breakout long that I'm going to cut if we don't have follow through. So far we're holding the breakout. I'm going to take some profits up on it above, but my goal this week will be to trade towards the bullish scenarios, which I've shared in the Discord, but I'm going to talk about here. So we'll just point out, this is that yellow or gold descending channel that I drew out over the weekend. And at the time, my thought was, I'd be maybe interested in shorting a retest of the channel. There was nice confluence here at the time for fib confluence, but looking for a move down into the lows of the channel. That would have aligned more here if we saw it, today or tomorrow. But we've now tapped this channel. We've had a major reaction, massive liquidations, massive volume. And so I don't think there's any reason to assume, especially since it's very likely that we still need a 5th wave on the macro timescale, that this isn't bullish. Yes, we could see lower, though it's always possible. Risk management is super important. But I think the primary thesis here should be that we're gonna move to the upside. So that's what I'll be trading towards. So we have some local liquidity up here. It's not hard to imagine that we could see a rejection off this structure, take some of these highs. There's a bit of a region here. Maybe chop some people up in a range, with the key idea being longs off this retest. I think a reasonable way to trade into those would be something like this. Looking for me personally, to hold the majority of these positions into a big move for a wave 3. Certainly some ideas to take some profits locally. Price won't probably move in a straight line. But there's also, depending on how price action forms here, I think going to be more opportunities because if this is a wave 3, it probably is going to be a very strong move to add to the longs on the way up on minor retracements. So we'll have to see how that price action forms, but the point being is, if we are moving into a wave 5, now this week and next week are probably the best opportunities to get into swing long positions, and paying attention to how all this structure develops over the week ahead is going to be super important. I think there's going to be big opportunities to take high asymmetric risk reward setups, high probability setups, and the structure should become quite clear. And so let's just go quickly to order flow. I just want to point out a couple things. Move this over here. All right, so we're on the 5-minute chart. I'm gonna actually pull up the TPOs here. Here at the lows, 270 million, 141 million volume, 270 million volume in this 1-minute candle. I mean, these are bottom candles, just statistically. These super high volume wicks into these lows. And a bottom candle doesn't always mean that it can't be retested. I wouldn't have been surprised to see price come back down and range here and retest these lows, but you're looking for this region to hold as a major low off of that volume. What happened over the weekend? Well, we start ranging, and we have this local move down, and we put in a pretty significant bullish divergence in order flow. You can't quite see the CVD line here, but CVD making a pretty significant lower low to a pretty significant higher high. This is just bullish locally, and I don't think there's any reason to suspect that we aren't beginning a much more bullish move to the upside. And so if that's the case, if this is more statistically likely to be a major low, and it's even more statistically likely to be a major low because off the minor low or the higher low, we put in a massive bullish divergence, then you should be looking for this to form a 1-2. And after the 1-2, pretty much every dip is going to be for longing in my view, because we shouldn't be seeing that level retested, and invalidation should be quite clear. Now, I'm not claiming that this is exactly how price action will develop. This is an idea locally that I'm looking at over the week ahead. But if something different happens here, I'm just going to adjust my plan. My targets for longing retracements might change, and my targets for some of the local highs might change, right? But being patient for some retracements here for a 1-2, I think is very reasonable before setting off too many logs. For example, personally, and this might mean I'm not going to have a lot of exposure, I'm not going to be longing up all the way into this initial move. I'm going to be waiting for a much cleaner 1-2 setup on this time frame. All right, so I'm going to read some comments here really quickly. And I am going to talk a little bit about alts as well. Someone says, my friend thinks it's going to retest 58K to 53K. Yeah, it's always possible. Somebody says, to that person, Jesus told me that's going to 10K. Please present it with the appropriate thesis, not a feeling. Someone says, do you have an Elliott wave placed on ETH chart, sir? Can you check ETH? Can you look at link? Can you show your delta bar setting later, please? Yeah, so ETH bouncing off a major 618. I mean, we can just assume that if Bitcoin says goes to 100K, or say goes to 100K, then ETH is probably on its way up as well. My plan for alts, we're going to look at the Bitcoin dominance chart really quick. I mentioned last week that the Bitcoin dominance chart looked quite bullish as we grinded up with this kind of rounding structure and looked more likely to break out than not. Now, of course, in this case, that just meant that ETH or Bitcoin went down, but alts got absolutely cooked. You know, technically this is a 3-day chart. We're now retesting this breakout. And you could maybe suspect, if we hold this breakout, that Bitcoin remains a bit stronger than alts over the coming days. But my plan for alts is over the next 2 to 3 days, see how structure develops on various alt charts, and look to long alts on their local retracements at the same time as Bitcoin is putting in this 1-2. So I'm not very interested in longing alts today on Monday, but later in the week, as we form some structure and we see the potential signs of a 1-2 type move forming on Bitcoin, I'm going to have some ideas on alts that I'm interested in longing. But I'm actually not going to cover a bunch of alts on live stream today. I'm going to review, like FTM is tapping its major 618. Retesting this high. That's an interesting local low idea. But for example, on FTM, if I was going to take a local long setup on it, I'd be waiting for something like this, but just seeing where the highs come in with Bitcoin's potential high, wherever that comes in over the next day or so, and looking to time that long entry with something like this on Bitcoin. I'm just going to catch up on a couple comments. I don't think there's any reason to personally get into a panic or a frenzy about you need to long every move up to the highs. I won't be surprised to see many people, and probably many of you, get chopped up. No matter what happens here, price has a way of chopping people up. I think some patience is still required. These highs obviously going to be a major liquidity idea, where we could see, if when we test them, price running through them, lots of FOMO longs, and maybe see some of those wrecked as we range here. Of course, it's always possible we just break out. I do have a breakout long here, but it's not quite the size that I would like to have. Veg Food Lover says, hey, how are you doing? Gary Network views, please. It's bullish now, 1 hour frame. Please tell me entry and target. Need your expert opinion. Well, you'll have to go back to the beginning of the live stream. I've covered some of my thoughts there, but this is a basic idea. This structure looks very relevant. We might have some confluence. If we come up and take these highs, then this is also our 618. So for example, this is a basic idea, but this could look like this, right? One, and this could be something like a flat, right? Expanded flat. Come and take these highs, A, B, C into the 1-2. So would I be super interested in shorting this? Not really. Maybe a little more interested in shorting a sweep of these highs for a local setup if order flow looks really nice. I think this zone is going to generate lots of liquidity, and there would be a nice confluence here to come take those highs, retest this as the 618, take some of these local impulse lows into this daily, or just call it horizontal support. Be a nice setup in this region. Someone says, I got liquidated on that drop at 62K. So I leveraged up buying the ETH low and swapping into meme, but Normie Roosh, well, I hope to outperform. Yeah, obviously a lot of people will have gotten liquidated. I'll take one moment to pop over to the Discord, which This comment came in over the weekend from a member. Someone said, feeling pretty stoked this week of all weeks. Things are coming together. The risk management is starting to sink in after wrecking several small accounts off and on over the last few years. Big week with some big moves. Stopped out of 4 out of 7 trades, so majority of trades losing this week. And I would assume got stopped out of longs. Total account up 7% of those out of those 7 trades. Looks like the alpha is starting to sink in. So of course, one of the most important things about trading is asymmetric risk reward and risk management. So that you might end up in a scenario where you take 7 trades, 4 win, 3 lose, and you're up for the week. And that could be, in some sense, you could call it a bad week, in that maybe you just were on the wrong side of some big moves, but you're not holding exposure through those big moves. You're stopping out your trades with invalidation, taking small losses and bigger wins. And of course, that's what trading's all about, is you are you're looking at your performance over a set of trades, not the outcome of single trades, and you're always using invalidation and risk management. Maybe I'll take a quick look at this as well. A little bit of a I haven't actually looked at this since the weekend. So I said I wish I could do these polls anonymously on Discord. Just a quick wellness check after yesterday's dump. And primarily alts, right? Lots of people were heavily exposed to alts, and lots of alts got crushed. And so I just said the poll was doing great is green, took a couple stops, but doing okay is yellow, took some big losses, feeling down, completely wrecked is purple. And I don't know what this poll result would look like on Twitter, but I would just say that, you know, having 120 of the respondents saying they're either doing great or took a couple stops but doing okay, 26 saying that they took some big losses, and a few saying that they are completely wrecked, probably is a good outlier result from the average community of traders. So obviously never like to see people taking big drawdowns, getting completely wrecked. It's going to be hard for some people to have avoided that, but it's good to see that a lot of the members are doing generally okay. I put quite an emphasis on risk management. I'm going to go back to the Discord for one more second, because I took some stops on longs over the into the weekend. So I had an idea for longing INJ. This is an idea I'd had for a long time. So I updated around $31 that I was looking for this move down to $26, was preparing for it that day. It's a level I've had on my chart for a long time. And then the FET range lows. So a little later that day, we got that quick move, right? That looks quite nice. From $31-ish, quick move to that $26 low. And I took that long setup only to get stopped out a little later. And I took a FET setup at the lows of the range looking for a higher low. So just saying that, you know, this is a nice sweep of this low. INJ is sweeping its low. I'm going to put on some long risk here. And the Bitcoin long at the time wasn't invalidated yet. So I said this right after I took those longs. Either about to have all longs print or take a bunch of stops, I think. Please remember it's important. Please remember it's important to remember. That's not a very well-formed sentence. The correlation of this market when taking multiple longs at once across alts and Bitcoin. If Bitcoin nukes, it all nukes typically, and risk should be allocated accordingly or allotted accordingly. So I took stops on these. I had invalidation, I had risk management. I was willing to put on some risk there, but I knew that if Bitcoin broke down, all of these alts are breaking down, and I very well could just be taking stops on all these trades, losing 1R on each of them. So that's not a big deal, but it is a big deal if you don't have invalidation and you get liquidated by the ensuing moves. We can look quickly at the FET chart. or I took that long, and I took that long like this. Or on the daily chart was something like this, right? As we wick through this on the lower time frames, and then I just took the stop and price came much, much lower. But trading isn't about never losing. It's about reasonable, well-formed setups, asymmetric risk reward, and invalidation with risk management. That's kind of a nice entry. Someone says, I bought INJ at $21. Those kind of big fast drops is a better way to get out of the way and wait instead of trying to catch the knife. Yeah, I mean, knife catching can go okay sometimes. Sometimes you catch the knife at the bottom, and it can end poorly. But whether you're quote-unquote knife catching or not, you should have a technical setup with invalidation and still have a stop loss if you're, in my view, or some reason to cut the trade. Because you could call this a knife catch and then price comes all the way down here, right? But generally, the fear is missing the opportunity to get long, and price is just going to go higher and higher and higher until you eventually FOMO in. But we can just look at the charts. On all time frames, there's typically great opportunities with a bit of patience to find nice, clean, long setups. And price isn't going to go straight up forever or in one direction forever. But something that's super important is not just thinking about the money you could make on a trade setup, is thinking about the money you could lose, right? Or with so an example here is FTM. I shared this idea of this being major resistance on FTM. I shared it initially around 70 cents before we had this move up. And looking at this as, hey, this might be a nice time to consider taking profits and removing some risk on swing longs from lower on FTM. And whether or not you take a short setup here is sort of irrelevant, but one thing you might not want to do, which many people will have done something like this, is mortgage your home, borrow money from your friends and family, go all in with 5x leverage long at the top of this move, thinking the FTM is going to go straight to $10, and then get liquidated for everything. And you know, you see stories like that in this market all the time. Eventually, the euphoria gets so extreme that people don't think these altcoins can even retrace 20%, 30%, let alone 50%, right? And so people buy into some of that euphoric hype about these coins that may or may not go much higher, but they start making those really they're not in their right minds, and they make some really poor decisions. And so I think it's important to be looking at charts, I would say soberly, where regardless of if you're you don't necessarily have to short something like this, but maybe you're not going to put your entire net worth into a leverage long at the top of a 600% move on FTM here when you consider some of the alternative scenarios. You're not going to catch every opportunity in the markets. It's just impossible. You're going to oftentimes be looking at things with hindsight and thinking, oh, if only I had gone all in here, if only I'd gone all in here, I would have. And the more and more you let that thought process play through your head, the more and more likely it is you're setting yourself up to get completely wrecked. Because you'll start to justify that, well, I just regret not going all in all these different times. I'm not going to make that mistake again, and I'm going to go all in here. Just accepting that you're not going to catch every move, and your job is to interact with the market reasonably over long periods of time. You're going to miss some moves, you're going to take some small losses, and you're going to catch some nice moves. You don't need to capture every single dollar out of the market, and capital preservation is such an important part of trading. Don't put yourself out of the game. And many people, obviously, this weekend are out of the game. They lost everything. Doesn't matter how much they were up. It doesn't matter how many trades they got right in a row. How many times they dodged the bullet. For a lot of people, it's over. At least temporarily, until they rebuild. But if they do the same thing, it's just the same story. But yeah, I mean, these are my thoughts. We're coming into the New York Open in a few hours. 4.5 hours. So as of now, I think we even might come and retest these lows with the middle of the. We have this level. I think it's still relevant, regardless of if we test it here or here. But I'm looking for a move up, generally, over the next day, to put in the top of a wave 1, and then to form our wave 2. And I think anything other than that should be treated as a low time frame setup, as the most probable outcome. I just don't see the case that we just keep going straight up here, but we may, so we'll see what happens. I also don't see the case for making a new low as being very probable. All right, well, I just wanted to kind of tune in here on Monday and share a few brief thoughts on Bitcoin. And obviously, it's hard to say, but had I caught the low of this wick for long over the weekend, maybe I'd be a little less aggressive about wanting to make sure I'm catching the wave 2 here. But I think I still would be looking to add to longs. But the best thing to do is never, in my view, never operate from the mindset that you are afraid you're going to miss the move. So whatever mindset you would have had you caught along at the bottom of this wick and prices going higher and higher, maintain that mindset as if you were long from here, because it's never a good excuse to long a poorly structured or planned trade. In my view, it's never a good excuse, simply because you've missed a trade lower. So it makes no sense for me to say, oh, I missed this long, I'm going to just long here. You know, price is just going higher and higher and higher. I don't want to miss the all-time high breakout, unless you have a structured trade up here. But the point is, don't take trades because you missed a different trade. Just structure a new trade. And so that's what I'm doing here, is I'm still being patient. I'm still waiting for some structure to form here. And I think I'm going to find some nice, clean technical setups. Maybe I'll give people a chance to ask a couple questions if they come in, and then I'll wrap up the live stream, keep it short. Yeah, I think something like this. Don't expect the price to go straight down here, by the way, but okay, maybe there's no questions. I might wrap up the live stream here. Someone asks, how would I trade a macro low on the weekly time frame? Let's get rid of all these charts. It would, for me, be very similar. Obviously, this sweep of this weekly candle low would have been quite a clean setup, actually. but just looking for price to come back and retest these weekly lows. Maybe sweep this weekly candle low, retest these weekly candle lows. On the weekly time frame, we have very clear horizontal structure. And I, of course, did actually take this short up here. But I didn't hold it all the way down. I took profits on it. But I think the weekly structure is very clear. Horizontal low, horizontal low. We've swept this weekly candle low. We've swept this weekly candle low. Coming back and retesting this weekly candle low. Looks like quite a clean setup. Could even say it's quite interesting. Like let's call on the weekly time frame this as a major high and this as a major low. We put in a minor low and a minor high, and we came up and swept the minor high. And now we've come back and swept the minor low, leaving the major high and major low untapped. And so critical weekly time frame support would just have to be these 2 weekly candle lows. Resistance up at these weekly candle highs. Hopefully that's helpful. I would say that even though I'm looking at these charts on the lower time frames, and maybe that is the 1 hour chart, looking at some of this internal structure, I consider these high time frame levels, and I'm looking at this as a high time frame level. I understand that it's a higher time frame horizontal, and the retest of that would be quite a clean setup. I'm going to be looking at some alts throughout the week, but I want to see how this Bitcoin move shapes up. You also could call this a local breakout on Bitcoin as well, just from a trending perspective. All right, well, I'm going to keep it short. I think this is going to be a really important week to keep an eye on how structure develops here. And personally, I'll just say, you know, it's not a prediction. I guess it's just what I think is most likely, that we may range here for the next week and a half. But I would say 2 weeks from now, it's more likely than not that we're pushed up to or testing all-time highs. And so if we do get a range in here, which would be my preference, I think this is where the majority of the cleanest opportunities are going to lie for getting long on Bitcoin over the next week. But we'll see what happens.